Welcome to the Legal Insurrection Podcast. Today is February 14th, and this is episode 23. I'm Kimberly Kay, and I'm the editorial and operations director with the Legal Insurrection Foundation. And I'm here with our president and founder, Professor William Jacobson. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, happy Valentine's Day to all of y'all who do such things. I don't know about anyone else, but I have two children who are very hopped up on sugar and dyes, as these are things we don't usually consume on a regular basis, but they were super, super excited about today and have enjoyed it so far. So, however you celebrate, happy Valentine's Day. I think we can go ahead and jump in, and I will preface this by saying that my apologies. Somehow it's afternoon, and I failed to adequately caffeinate myself prior to recording. So I feel like I owe everyone listening an apology. I haven't had my go juice yet. But let's start off. I mean, I know this is a really big deal. We have tracked Lawfare and in some ways have tried to be a remedy to the one-sided lawfare in this country, but especially that's being waged against the Trump administration. Can you tell us a little bit about what has happened in that sphere over the last week, for people who may not be aware?
Yeah, well, the Democrats have been planning for at least months to drown the Trump administration in lawsuits. New York Times, of all places, had a big write up on it. I think it was either today or yesterday, that a Democrat group, I think it's called Democracy Forward. Of course, whenever Democrats use the word democracy, it means they're trying to kill democracy. Democracy Forward, very well financed, claims to have approaching 800 attorneys lined up, 40 different groups lined up, plaintiffs lined up, ready to challenge all of what they expected Trump administration or Republican administration, if it was not Trump, policy to be. So they basically took Project 2025, they took policy proposals, and they lined up their litigation for each and every one of those before Trump ever did anything or took office. And so what you're seeing is, I think we're up over 40 now, 40 lawsuits, and it might be significantly more, filed against various Trump initiatives and policies. And what they're hoping, and they're filing them in blue states where they're likely to have judges appointed or nominated by Democrat senators to try to get restraining orders on Trump. They've had some success so far. Of course, a restraining order is temporary. And so we'll find out in a week or two how many of those last. But there's one that's been particularly outrageous that I'd like to talk about, because while the outcome is not certain, it typifies how Democrats got away with something they never should have gotten away with. Everybody's heard of DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, and they're auditing various departments in the executive branch. And one of those is they had a small number of people who were going to look at the Treasury Department and try to see if by monitoring things they could detect fraudulent payments, that sort of thing. And so a group of states, I think it was 18 states, I might be slightly off on the number, but something like that, blue states, led by New York State Attorney General Letitia James' office, went into court on a Friday night at 9:30 or 9:45 p.m., filed a lawsuit claiming hair on fire, emergency. Elon Musk and his crew are going to pilfer information and private information from the Treasury computer systems. If you, judge, don't stop them right now. They got a judge they knew they would get, who is sympathetic, because by going in on a Friday night, they got the emergency duty judge, and they know, because it's right on the court's calendar, who is the emergency duty judge. So they judge shopped, okay? And they got a judge who, without even allowing the government to be heard, at 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning, issued a temporary restraining order, what they call ex parte, meaning the other side's not able to be heard, um, eliminating any access to Treasury payment systems by any political appointee, and only allowing, I think he used the term civil servants to have access. Uh, so what he did is he essentially decapitated the Treasury Department. The Secretary of Treasury would not have access under that order to the payment systems in his own department. And it calls into question, whether this is something a federal judge should be doing. It was so outrageous that not only did it spark a political backlash, but when the case got assigned to the actual judge on the case through random assignment. So in a normal course, if you don't go to the emergency judge at 10 o'clock at night, you get assigned to whoever is the next judge in line, which you wouldn't know. It's supposed to be random assignment. And that judge scaled it back and said, well, wait a second. The first judge must have just been inadvertently using language that removed the political leadership. And basically, the government, when it finally did get to put its papers in, made some fantastic points. First of all, these states have no standing to sue. Second of all, there was no emergency. Okay, the main person they're complaining about having access to the systems left the department 3 days before the lawsuit was filed. The other person they're complaining about only has over-the-shoulder access, which means he can see what other people are doing. I should say the other political appointee has over-the-shoulder access. He can see what they're doing, but he can't actually operate the computer. So there was no emergency on a Friday night. It was hysterics, and it was the Democrats getting a friendly judge who they judge shopped for in a friendly forum. And the judge walked it back. And I think it's being argued today. And I've seen the papers, and the government has a very strong case that there is no case here. Okay, but this gets to a bigger point. The Democrats' strategy throughout the country now, but mostly in blue states, is to get the federal judiciary to usurp the executive powers of the executive branch. And that's what this is all about. And it's a very dangerous ploy. These judges should not be entertaining it, but in multiple cases they have. And they've issued temporary restraining orders on a whole host of issues that really amount to political policy issues. Again, will the restraining orders survive? Remains to be seen. But the Trump administration needs to get some of these cases up to higher level courts and up to the U.S. Supreme Court, because otherwise you are going to have, a true crisis where judges are being asked to run departments. Another perfect example is in Rhode Island federal court. A judge who's was fairly controversial when he was appointed because he was a mega donor to Democrats, including to Sheldon Whitehouse, who nominated him. But he's a perfectly smart judge, but he was controversial when he was appointed, issued an order prohibiting the temporary pause in payments that the Trump administration had ordered, and said you can't stop anything, basically. And so the government wisely has gone back to him multiple times saying, okay, we have just flagged this payment as possibly fraudulent, but under your order, we are not allowed to stop it. We want you to make the decision on that. And he's getting very frustrated. He's saying, well, my order is clear. Well, no, your order is not clear. You've already suggested we might be violating it. This is the problem. If the federal judges really want to run the executive branch, then the executive branch should be in their courtrooms 2 to 3 times a day asking the judges to make decisions. And the judges are going to regret that. So the Democrats love to scream about a constitutional crisis. There is no constitutional crisis other than the Democrats lost. They are trying to create a constitutional crisis by having the judiciary and the federal district courts assume control of the executive branch. And so that's where we're heading. It's going to come to a head. I hope one or more of these cases get to the Supreme Court very soon, because we as a country need to know, moving forward with a new president who won not only the Electoral College, but the popular vote, whether he's going to be able to run the executive branch or whether it's going to be run by federal judges. And we need to know that right now.
I mean, those are great points. Do you think that the Trump administration should comply?
Trump has already said he would, and I think that's the wise thing to do, okay? Because uh, you get into a very dangerous situation, which we were in with Joe Biden. Remember, the Supreme Court ruled that Joe Biden could not forgive student loans, wasn't within his authority. And he publicly announced, okay, they've told me I can't. I'm just going to find another way to do it. Okay. And so it's not unprecedented. I mean, the Democrats have defied the courts, but I don't think that's the wise thing to do in the short run. I don't think it's the wise thing to do. I think that what needs to happen is you need to get these things out of the hands of the district courts and into the hands of the courts of appeal, and in the hands, hopefully, of the Supreme Court. And it's only going to take the Supreme Court once or twice slapping down these judges with these crazy rulings for the message to get out. But it really needs to get out sooner rather than later. Otherwise, we're going to be paralyzed, which is what the Democrats want. We will have a paralyzed executive branch where federal district courts are being asked to make policy judgments as opposed to upholding and enforcing clearly articulable rights by people who have standing, by people who should deserve to be in court. And the government in that New York Treasury Department case has made a very compelling case that there is no standing for state attorney generals to be in court contesting privacy issues.
So, what about the impeachment of judges that are doing things like this?
These are things that make people feel good, okay? But it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen, okay? Just like impeaching Trump was not going to happen because it would never get through the Senate and the amount. So those are all things that make people feel good. I think what needs to happen is a couple of things. One, these need to get up to higher courts very quickly, okay? And temporary restraining orders, it's very hard to get that in front of an appellate court because nothing's actually been decided. It's just a temporary stopgap. But I predict within the next month, these things will be before the federal courts of appeal. A lot of them are coming out of the First Circuit, which is not going to be friendly to Trump in all likelihood. And that's a perfect vehicle to then get it up to the Supreme Court. And so I think that is the way to go. And the Trump administration needs to put the full force of the Justice Department, and I believe they have, into fighting these things. The case that I've read the court papers most carefully in is the New York Southern District Treasury case, the so-called Doge case, which doesn't actually involve Doge. It involved a couple of people assigned to Treasury. And that one, I have to say, based on the papers, the Civil Division of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District appears to be doing their best. There's nothing in those papers or how they've conducted themselves that I'm aware of that leads me to think they're sabotaging the administration. They're making all the right arguments. They're making them forcefully, and they need to continue. And that needs to happen around the country. The U.S. attorneys' offices are massive. I don't know the exact number, okay, but they're huge, and they have huge resources. And now that Republicans and Trump control the Department of Justice, I think they need to use those resources. They need to get aggressive. And also, in fairness to some of the challengers, the Trump administration is running into some procedural things that give the other side some, at least straight face basis to be in court. And Trump needs to very carefully think out how things are removed, because what people don't understand is once something is done in the federal government, it's very hard to undo it. Probably the best example of that is DACA. I forget what it stands for, but it basically was the deferred action on something or something. It's basically that allowed people under a certain age who had been brought to the country illegally and had been here for a certain period of time, to defer being deported. And I don't know if that's the best description, but it's close. And DACA wasn't a law. DACA wasn't even an executive order. It was an Obama memo. It literally was a memo by someone in the Obama administration. And Trump 1.0 administration, the first administration, tried to get rid of DACA. And the court said, well, you didn't follow the right procedure. And it got hung up. Eventually, now, years later, almost a decade later, courts are ruling it's unconstitutional, it's illegal. You can't change immigration law by a memo. But for years, the Trump administration was unable to get rid of DACA because of the procedural requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act. And so that's what he's facing now, that a lot of things that he's trying to undo what Biden did, or he's trying to change policy, he's running into those procedural things. You've got to do things a certain way. And I think they need to be more careful about that. They need to plot it out more before they do it. The end result of all this, though, is we have a popular president, somebody who's above ground on popularity. I think he's 53, 54% support in the latest polling, which for him is unbelievable. I think Biden was in the 30s when he left office. You have policies that are wildly popular, particularly on immigration. And Democrats can throw a wrench into the gears a little bit with the federal courts, but at the end of the day, a popular president controlling Congress and controlling the massive federal bureaucracy is going to be able to get most of this stuff done. It just may not be in the first month. It may take longer.
No, I mean, it's one of the things too that just makes me hate our government. It makes me hate our legal system. It's just, for everything we like to pretend we still are as a country, most of it is just not true anymore. Um, I am a little bit heartened by the fact that the Trump administration seems a bit more prepared this time over what they were last time. I'm sure that they knew that they would meet opposition with a handful of things, but decided to go ahead and push through anyway. Because this isn't their first rodeo. They've been through this before. So, I'm glad that at least they're going full steam ahead, and I think it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see how some of these things shake out.
Think back to the first term. The Democrats challenged his immigration orders, and it took them 2 or 3 versions to finally get it through because they would run to district courts in multiple locations around the country. And the strategy was they only had to win once. The administration had to win every time. They only had to get one judge to issue a nationwide injunction.
Right.
And they were successful. I remember one of the big immigration injunctions was from a judge in Hawaii. Okay. Trump eventually won that. The Supreme Court eventually ruled in his favor, but it took time. It took time. And I think the other thing that the Trump administration is much better at now is engaging in executive action that really can't be challenged, like
Yes,
shutting down
completely
the
agree.
border, okay, where the president has foremost authority in terms of modifying federal grant programs to cut off the flow of money to DEI and to racist programs. So there's a lot he can do, and he's doing a much better job. He's got his people in place relatively early in all of the major, departments. So, as frustrating as the lawfare is, let's keep in mind it's just the Democrats' way of slowing him down. But I don't
Yes.
believe they can stop him ultimately.
No, I don't think so either. And I know that, and most people know this too, that it's 100% a political endeavor on the part of the Democrats. There's a video floating around, and we can include it in the links with this podcast that I saw yesterday. And you have Al Gore standing at the podium with Bill Clinton next to him when Clinton was the president, talking about doing much of exactly what Trump is doing now, cutting federal workforce. This is Clinton's big budget initiative to try and save money and trim the federal deficit. And so, I mean, it's like literally the exact same thing. Now, he had a lot more support across the country for what he was doing. Um, and at least at the time was not yet as despised as Trump may be by some people. So, but it's all of that to say it's 100% political, and I mean we know that, but I just think it's worth reiterating that this is something Democrats, with a currently living president, tried to do themselves, and championed. So, um, it just it's just so irritating. Just let the man govern, just let him do what he was elected to do. Like we've talked about before, this was not a typical election. This was a complete and total whooping for all of the wokeness and all of the grossness that they've tried to really cram down our throats over the last several years. So anyway, but I'm not near as concerned this time around as I was last time with some of the things that we're seeing, at least on the lawfare front. So moving on to Vance's speech, I was so wrong about him. I think we had talked about this on a podcast where I was a little ambivalent, kind of surprised, kind of disappointed that Trump had picked Vance for his VP. I just didn't see what that would bring to the table strategically and in a bunch of other ways. But he has just not, he just continues to knock it out of the park over and over and over again. And I don't think I've seen a politician who handles, Trump has his ways, which are, and most of the time, hilarious in the things that he says. But Vance just has a way of being very calm but firm and putting up with no crap, but he's not a jerk about it. That's really hard to do. Like, that's really, really hard to do in a way that doesn't come across as being nasty or combative. Trump is combative and that works for him. It's 100% his personality, but what are your thoughts on that? Do you want to maybe first talk about what he discussed and um
Yeah, I mean, before I discuss what he discussed, I agree. I mean, Vance has just turned out to be the biggest unexpected positive surprise. I remember, I think we talked about it when he was first nominated or announced that he would be the VP. And I think my feeling was like non-committal. I don't really know enough about him. I'm not against him. I'm not for him. I guess I was hoping at the time, I think I expressed this, that Trump would make a purely electoral move and maybe nominate the governor of Virginia in the hope of winning Virginia. But, once again, Trump ended up being smarter than I am, or if not smarter, at least having a better sense than I do. He picked the perfect person. Oh my God, this guy is unbelievable. He's articulate. He comes across well. He's got a beautiful young family with the three kids traveling to Europe. I mean, it's everything. He goes head on with the talking heads on, CBS and wherever, and completely demolishes them. He's just a star. And 4 years is a long time, but unless something changes, in my mind, he is
he'll
the
just get better.
presumptive.
Yeah.
Sorry.
He'll just get better. I mean, if
Yeah.
he's starting
And
out unpolished this way, he'll just get better.
unless something changes, he is the presumptive nominee in 2028. He really is. As much as I like Ron DeSantis, substantively, I mean, I don't think he's got the people power and the people connection, obviously, than Trump, and I think than Vance. I mean, Vance makes a connection. So now what he said, which proves the point of why he's so great. Okay, I forget what the organization was, whether it was the EU conference or some big conference of heads of state and delegates in Europe. Some sort of European conference. And he gets up there and he lays into them in a smile, with a smile on his face, not angry, about how backward they are sliding in terms of free speech, in terms of migration, how they're destroying their own countries. And he does it with such a good sense of humor. I think the money line, at least to me, you know, was if the U.S. could survive 10 years of criticism from Greta Thunberg, you can survive a few months of criticism from Elon Musk. Okay, because they're all complaining about Elon Musk. Okay, who is partially part of the administration. I mean, in a weird sort of way. And I think he is designated a special government employee and he's got all his security clearances. But the point is, he's so good at articulating it and bringing the facts to bear. And he doesn't, I don't know if he had a teleprompter or not, but it certainly didn't seem like he had a teleprompter. He doesn't need a teleprompter. He's able to do these things. So and there apparently the initial reactions I saw, some high level minister or government official in Germany said it was totally inappropriate, his speech. Yeah, because he told them the truth about how they're destroying their own societies and how, societies that supposedly were the bastion of freedom are becoming repressive through these, woke hate speech laws, which basically means you ban anything you don't like. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a big thing. The Europeans were very upset about it, but that's what we needed. That's absolutely what we needed. And so it was a rock star speech. It was funny. It was memorable. And I don't know if it's going to change the Germans, probably not. But they need to wake up. I mean, it's falling on the United States to try to convince Western Europe to save itself. I don't know that it will be successful. I don't know that it can still be done, given what's happened the last several years in Europe. He threw out some statistics about the migration in just the last 3 years has doubled. I mean, insane levels. Germany's almost no longer Germany anymore. We
Yeah.
certainly know that Ireland is soon not to be Ireland anymore. And they're doing it to themselves. Okay. Every culture in the world apparently is entitled to preserve itself, other than European culture. And so, if you saw this sort of migration to, a non-Western country, overtaking basically the culture, they'd call it colonialism or neo-colonialism or imperialism and things like that. But that's what's happened to Europe. It's really sad. We're seeing the death of Europe by suicide, what God Sod, I think, refers to as suicidal empathy uh, in front of ourselves. And so J.D. Vance gave voice to that. And I think it's something that Europeans need to hear, but I don't think they're listening.
I don't either. I mean, I think it's a very similar situation to what we have here, that I'm sure the people are listening and I'm sure the people agree, but the governance is very different. And I think we have to remember too that in many of these countries, what we see portrayed in the media is probably not accurate to what the majority of the people in the country want or think or believe. And we have a tradition of, yeah, taking up arms and fighting for what we want. Some countries do, some countries don't, at least not to the extent that we do. Americanism is a very different thought, a different, very different ideal, or at least it used to be. Um, which was always so funny to me too. When I did live in that part of the world, there was always a fascination by Americans, about Americans and our culture, and particularly the fact that we own firearms and that we don't like to put up with things from the government. This was kind of an viewed as an anomaly, at least in the interactions that I had. But all of that to say, I want to make sure we keep that right perspective there, that the governance does not always reflect the people, as we know, having lived under the last 4 years. I really hope they get it together, because I don't want to be, I know we are probably one of the largest countries in the Western world, but I don't want to be the last country in the Western world um, who hasn't been overrun by, Islamic extremists, because it's really what it is. It's mass migration from the Middle East. It's just completely obliterating Europe as we know it. Many countries there, not all of them, but many of them. Um, so I do want to talk about Doge just briefly before we move on. I think I saw something on X last night or yesterday that they had arrived at the IRS. And I just think that's going to be so delicious. Like we talked about before, I don't think we have a clue the extent of corruption. This isn't just, oh, we misappropriated a couple of funds. Oh, a kickback here. Oh, kickback there. I don't think we have a clue how much corruption exists in every facet of the federal government, and how much we have poured into this for decades. This is not something that's only happened in the last couple of years. They have a massive scam machine running in the Beltway, and they're using our money to fund it, all the while wanting to keep super close tabs on what we do with our money. So I'm curious
Yeah,
to
I
see
mean,
what comes of that.
your $600 Venmo payment is going to get more attention than billions flowing out to these left-wing NGOs. And one point, I've made and I'll keep making, the flow of money and cutting the flow of money to these groups is the single most important thing Trump has started and will continue. And it's going to be very difficult for the Democrats to stop him. But billions of dollars are flowing to the left wing ecosphere. They may call themselves climate groups. Um, uh, it was just announced that I forget which department it was. It was the one Lee Zeldin heads up. Just canceled a $50 million a year contract to a climate group whose main theme is that climate justice is about Palestine. Okay. A lot of the anti Israel, anti Semitic movement in the world has been funded by USAID and by other US government entities. And hundreds of millions, it's been announced already, and it might be more, it might be in the billions at this point, but hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts are being canceled. Okay. That is going to really put the big hurt on a lot of these left wing activist groups who we did not know until Trump took office this time were actually funded by the US government. A lot of them are church related groups, so obviously you can't give money to a church, but there might be a charity that's related who have been assisting the illegal immigration. And I think there've been a lot of good lines on the internet lately, but one of them is that if you're a church dependent on government money, you're not a church.
Yeah,
Okay. you're,
exactly.
you're the government. Okay. And the same with these if you're a non-governmental entity dependent on money from the government to survive, you're the government. You're not
You are.
non-governmental. Okay.
You're not
You
an
know,
you're not an NGO any longer.
you're not an NGO if your main source of income is USAID. And so that impact will be felt immediately. You're going to see a lot of these groups running out of money. And all the George Soroses in the world don't have the money to replace the billions that have been flowing out of the US Treasury to these groups. Soros can pick up some of the slack, but he's already probably fully committed, and his various groups. It's not like they haven't been doing anything. Okay. Does the Open Society Foundation, do all these Soros funded entities have hundreds of millions of dollars to replace what the government's cut off? I don't think so. They've got a lot of money. Okay. No doubt about that. But I don't think they have that kind of free money that's not already committed to do this. And so that Trump needs to keep a focus on cutting off the flow of funds to the activist groups. That will be a long-term benefit. Same like it's the primary benefit of what he's done to do damage to the DEI industrial complex in the US. His initial order, I think it was the first day when he was on stage, I'm sorry, even before he went on stage. So that afternoon, he signed some executive orders, went back to his office and signed them, plenty of TV cameras. And one of them I believe one of them either that afternoon or that night, was banning funding through any government executive branch office that included DEI requirements. it ended. I mean, that's
Yeah.
something that nobody can stop him from doing. Okay. And so he's been very successful at that. And that's where he needs to focus. Let them fight out some of the other things. Using the executive branch to fight the ideological battle on DEI is going to be more difficult. We're going to talk about that at our upcoming um, online event next Wednesday at 12:30. We're going to talk about what's happening in the fight against DEI and how difficult it's going to be to change the DEI culture from the executive branch and from executive orders. They can do significant, impactful things, but it's a much deeper battle than that. And so I think that all in all, he's done as good as I think could be hoped in these first 3 weeks.
No, I agree. I agree. Um, I 100% agree. And last point on Doge is that, every time I see someone complaining about exposing the rampant fraud and corruption, you know, it was not very long ago that the Biden administration was wanting to hire 80 something thousand, I think, what was it, 82,000, 85,000 armed IRS agents to go door to door to audit Americans and whether or not they were forking over enough money to this massive fraud of, a taxpayer funded kickback program. Um, so I hope everyone involved in this gets exactly what they should deserve by bilking us out of all this money over the years. It's just my hope. I hope that there is justice in this situation. I'm so glad that this is being dealt with and exposed the way that it is too. We need to know. We need to see this. We need to see exactly what the government is doing with the money that they take from us. Um, and we're always told that there's not enough money for this or there's not enough money for that. Well, now we know why, because it's all being sent to other people. None of it's staying here to actually take care of the things that need to be taken care of here. But anyway, so do you want to talk about the situation at the border and the border wall and any
Yeah.
updates we have?
Um, it's basically media gaslighting. So
Mm,
one thing I saw is Axios is reporting, and when Axios reports something, it's just a leak from
yeah,
somebody trying to get something out there.
exactly.
They don't do actually any investigation. They're just like a funnel, okay? Including on Israel-related things, particularly during the Biden administration. So they're just a funnel, and the funnel is being filled by gaslighting points. Oh, look, Trump, Border Patrol or whatever the right organization is not making as many arrests as the Biden administration did. To the point being, supposedly Biden was even more aggressive on enforcement. Well, no, the reason they're not making as many arrests is people aren't getting through the border. Okay, so you've taken whatever the number was, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, multiple hundreds of thousands a month crossing the border. So Biden would pick up a few of them and had big numbers for picking up a few of them. Now almost nobody. I mean, the reports I've seen are it dropped by 95% plus crossing the border. So of course the arrests and the detainments are down because people aren't getting across the border. This is just total gaslighting. The border, Trump proved within 3 weeks, actually proved it almost on day one, that the border could be all but sealed very easily if there's a will to do it. There was no will to do it by the Biden administration. They wanted just the opposite. He's already close to accomplish that. Not to say it's hermetically sealed, not to say some people don't get through, but basically the flow of illegals, traffic across the border has come to a standstill in 3 weeks under Trump. It could have been done, and we would have had several million, at least, fewer illegal immigrants in the country that came in under Biden, including some very bad people, gang members, who Trump appears to have set his focus on in terms of deportation. And of course, even there, the Democrats are trying to slow things down with lawsuits and litigation. But so Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the border is. The Trump accomplished what was one of the top goals, whether it was goal number one or goal number two or goal number three. It was near the top of closing the border down to illegal traffic. It's almost completely been done in 3 weeks.
Yeah, which I mean, but he showed that even in his first term too, how so many of these things, whether it's peace in the Middle East, and I know that wasn't 100% peace, but that too many people make too much money off of fomenting conflict wherever that is. And he made it so easy. He comes in, he's like, okay, here we go, done. Like, it doesn't have to be this overwrought process. We don't have to have a gazillion dollars to do anything. You just have to put the people that we have in the places where they need to be, and then the job is done. This is not a difficult thing to accomplish. Um, and that's one of the things I really enjoy about him as a leader and as a president, is watching how he just makes things happen that we've been told for years we just can't do. It's just too hard. We don't have enough resources, or whatever the excuse is. So I'm very glad for that, especially being a resident of a border state. Our life down here is very different than it is in other parts of the country for many reasons. One
Well,
of the
you're in a big state, so
Yeah, we
I'm
are.
probably closer to the Canadian border than you are in
That's
North
probably
in
true.
Texas to
That's
the
probably
Mexican
true.
border. Okay.
That's probably true. But I don't know. I mean, we're only about an hour ish, hour and 20 minutes away from Louisiana, and that's a whole other world over there. So no, we love our Louisiana people. My mom's actually Cajun, and so we definitely have family that I cannot understand. True story. Um but yeah. I do want to talk briefly about handful of education bills, kind of shifting focus a little bit from the federal level to the state level. I'm in Texas, and there is a massive effort by our governor, who is just a perpetual disappointment, and the Texas legislator, to push a bill that they're calling a school choice bill. It's not a school choice bill. It's a bill that would essentially establish a voucher program that would gut rural schools, that would increase the arm of the state, because in the state of Texas, um, homeschool is considered private school, right? So you have certain protections based on the fact that homeschoolers are considered private education, and the state doesn't really get involved in that very much. And so this bill creates a situation where private schools are have a lot more government oversight than what they did before, because as we know, anytime the government's handing out money, there's always a string attached. There just is. There always is. And so there's massive opposition to this bill by people. I mean, people who send their kids to public school, people who send their kids to private school, the homeschool world. Everyone is up in arms over this bill. Most of these people are right leaning, but our state governance is acting like it's the media and the Democrats who are opposed to this particular bill, which is very frustrating, because that's just not the case. Because I've also followed the school choice movement long enough to where, I mean, it's over a decade now that I attended a massive school choice rally in Houston. And Sheila Jackson Lee, who's like the worst of the worst of the worst that the Democrats had to offer, was 100 in support of bills exactly like the one that's currently up for consideration in the Texas House. Um, and no one's listening. Apparently, some order has been sent down, or it appears that that's the case, that they're just going to vote this through. And so in response to that, there have been other legislation trying to at least make carve outs um, for homeschools and things like that. All of that to say, though, I mean, my point is less about this awful bill, which, if you're interested in things like this, is Senate Bill 2. It's much less about this particular bill and much more about the fact that, just because I want to encourage people, that just because we have, Trump in office, and we have all of these pieces and parts moving in the right direction on the federal level, usually the worst offenses we see, and I'm sure Bill would probably agree to this as well, The craziest things that we ever see in covering news and politics always come out of some like tiny town in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's not things that happen on a massive federal scale, though Doge and what they're uncovering is kind of blowing the lid off of that. But I really want to encourage you, if you are not actively aware or involved or engaged, to pay attention to the things that are coming out of your state house, even in red states. I mean, this is Texas, and we're looking at a program that it's essentially subsidizing people who can already afford private schools, and they're taking they would be funding it using our budget surplus, which, I mean, my thought is, if you've overtaxed me, give me my money back. Like, and down here we have completely ridiculous property taxes. We don't have a state income tax, but they do get you in their own way. So just be aware, be mindful. Education is always one of the most important battlefields that we fight on. It's part of why we fight in in that space, in that arena, with all we do here at the Legal Insurrection Foundation. But just be aware, find out what's going on in your state house, find out what they're battling about, because I saw something, and this is 100% true, that was talking about how your freedoms are never more than one bad piece of legislation away from changing, right? And on some level, we know that. Reagan talked about very similar type things. But you have to be involved, and you have to be engaged, and you have to be willing to call the people who are responsible for representing you and email them and annoy them so that they vote in a way that satisfies their constituents, which ought to be you. So I hope that at some point we get a shakeup in the Texas governance, much like what's happening at the federal level. If you're involved in Texas politics or know anything about it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We no longer have the Bush machine running everything, but there's still a machine there, and there's still a handful of people that fund and run and control what happens and what doesn't. So just pay attention to where you are. I don't mean that condescendingly, I mean that encouragingly, that we all have a responsibility wherever we are to ensure that crazy things are not able to pass because no one's aware. And they definitely try to make sure that you don't know what's going on. I've seen a billion fact sheets, just using this bill again as an example, completely mischaracterizing what this bill is, and the condescension is very, very strong, and that they don't believe people like you and I are capable of reading and understand the legislation that they wrote and understanding the ramifications that might come from that. And I trust you are very smart people, and I know that you can do that. I believe in you. So pay attention, get involved, and at the very least, email your representatives if there's something that you think should not be happening, or encourage them to pass things you think should. So that's my get involved and don't leave it to someone else, because everyone needs to do something pep talk for the week. So there you have it. And like Bill mentioned, he scooped me. I was going to promote our online event, which is totally fine. I'll share. We do have, I'm excited about this particular event. We'll be talking about DEI and what we believe the future is. We've been fighting this for years. We've been writing about it for decades, and have been, I don't want to be so bold as to say 100% right about what we think will happen, but we've been pretty darn accurate. Bill especially, in what he predicts things will happen, and then what actually comes to pass. And these are not positive outcomes either. So it's not to, as always, we're not about fear. We don't want to motivate people out of fear, but we do want to encourage you that there is a chance and there is hope, so long as people do something. So we'll be having that discussion at lunchtime next Wednesday. We'll have a link to that event in the post for this podcast, and you can find that link and links to everything we have discussed today at legalinsurrection.com/23. And be sure to check out Legal Insurrection, our blog. We cover all kinds of things that are happening here and elsewhere. It's really great place. Best blog ever. And so we thank you for listening. We hope you found it valuable. And we hope that you'll join us next week. It's free. Everything we do is free. Of course, there is an option to chip in. I can assure you we're a very lean run organization. We do everything we can to put everything as much as we can directly back into the work that we do. It's something we're very, very careful about, very aware of, and very particular about. So with that, happy Valentine's Day. Have a great weekend. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And have a good one. We'll see y'all next week. Bye-bye.